My daughter said she'd rather be an orphan than my daughter if I didn't give her the house. So I signed nothing. And the next day, the keys to her job and her townhouse turned to dust in her palms. This wasn't all. What happened next was rather unbelievable. Before then, I want to quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. Help us reach our first 100 subscribers. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. My name is Marin, and I have spent my whole life building homes out of my heart, shelters that kept out the world, that kept the fragile things safe. For 20 years, I've lived in this house, the one I built with my own 2 hands and a dozen second-hand dreams. But all of that care, all of that quiet labor, meant nothing the night my daughter, Leah, sat across from me at this kitchen table and told me she'd rather be an orphan than call me her mother if I didn't sign over the deed. Her words, so cold and final, cracked something deep inside me, like a winter branch giving way beneath the weight of ice. I didn't know if I was supposed to cry or laugh, because I saw in that moment the truth I'd been refusing to see. She wasn't here for me. She was here for what I owned. And for the first time in my life, I let the silence do the talking. I signed nothing. She'd been wearing a white blouse that night, starched and stiff, and she kept smoothing it down as if the fabric itself would speak on her behalf. I watched her fingers, small, elegant hands that once cupped baby birds and believed in magic. Now, they were the hands of a stranger, demanding my house like it was just another line item in her life plan. She didn't look at me. Not really. She looked at the papers she'd brought, the ones she'd printed out and highlighted in neon yellow, as if color could soften the blow. When she finally met my eyes, there was nothing there. No warmth, no hint of the child I'd loved beyond reason. Only calculation. Only the cold arithmetic of ownership. "You're being unreasonable, Mom," she said, her voice so calm it almost broke me. "This house is wasted on you. You're alone here. I could make it into something better, something for my future. You wouldn't even miss it." I didn't answer. I just stared at her, and in that long, breathless pause, I realized she was right about one thing. I wouldn't miss the house if it meant losing myself, but I would miss her, and that was the ache I couldn't swallow down. My mouth tasted like ash as I forced myself to speak. "I signed nothing," I said quietly, the words so gentle they sounded like a prayer. "Not because I want to hurt you, but because this is all I have left of who I am. If you take it, there will be nothing left of me to give you. Nothing at all." She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker across her face, fear, maybe, or the last glimmer of conscience. But it was gone just as quickly, buried under the weight of her own ambition. She pushed the papers closer to me, her fingers tapping out an impatient rhythm on the table's scarred wood. "You'd rather see me fail than help me," she said. "You'd rather let me struggle than give me what I need. Fine. If that's how you want it, I'd rather be an orphan than your daughter." She stood up then, gathering her bag and her keys, her jaw set like stone. I didn't follow her to the door. I didn't plead or explain. I just sat there in the kitchen, listening to the echo of her words in the quiet. When the door finally clicked shut behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The house around me felt different, smaller, maybe, or just hollow in a way I'd never felt before. I pressed my palms against the table's worn edge and wondered if she'd ever understand what she'd just done. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the halls of this house, touching the walls, the door frames, the places her laughter used to echo. In every room, I saw the ghost of the child she used to be, the one who built blanket forts in the living room and left tiny handprints on the windows. I saw the girl who once believed I could fix anything, even the cracks in her heart. But I also saw the woman she'd become, the one who looked at me and saw nothing but a ledger waiting to be settled. I realized then that the house wasn't the only thing she was trying to take. She was trying to take my story, my past, my worth. And I couldn't let her have it. I sat in the dark for hours, my thoughts circling like crows around a dying tree. I thought about how easy it would be to give in, to sign the papers and let her have the house. But then I remembered the way she'd said orphan, the way she'd said it like it was nothing, like I was nothing. And I knew that was the moment she'd left me behind. Not the moment she walked out the door, but the moment she decided that love was just another transaction. That's when I knew I had to be done waiting for her to come home to me. I had to come home to myself. The next morning, I watched the sun rise over the house she wanted so badly. The light touched every corner of these rooms, turned the cracked paint and the sagging beams into something almost beautiful. I made coffee and drank it slowly, feeling the weight of every breath in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just sat there, listening to the quiet, and promised myself I'd never let her take anything else from me. Not even the echo of who I used to be. I knew she would come back. I knew she would try again, with new words, new demands, maybe even new threats. But I was done signing pieces of myself away. The house was mine, and so was the silence that had settled in my bones. She could call herself an orphan if she wanted to, but I would not call myself a mother to someone who saw my life as a stepping stone. I would be something else now, something stronger, something untouchable. In that stillness, I felt the first tremor of something like power. And it was enough to keep me breathing. In the days that followed, I learned how to become a shadow in my own house. I unplugged the phone and let the world fall silent around me, every unanswered call a small rebellion against the noise she tried to bring back in. I swept the kitchen floor in the early morning light and let the dust settle where it pleased, a quiet refusal to clean up the pieces of her mess. I didn't leave the house, didn't even open the curtains for a while. I wanted to feel the walls close in, to remember that this house was mine not because of a signature, but because it had held every version of me I'd ever been. And in that darkness, I found a strange sort of comfort, a place where I didn't have to be anyone's mother, anyone's caretaker. Just me, alone with the echo of her betrayal and the promise I'd made to myself not to let her take anything else. I let her calls go to voicemail, each message more frantic than the last. She started polite, her voice sweet as she asked me to be reasonable, to think about her future. But the sweetness was thin, a veneer that cracked with every new message. By the third day, her tone had shifted, sharp, almost cruel. "You're making this harder than it has to be," she said in one message, her words clipped and cold. "I'm not going to wait forever." I listened to those words in the dark of the living room, the only light coming from the lamp by the old armchair. I imagined her pacing her townhouse, fury simmering behind her polished facade. I could almost see her hands shaking as she spoke into the phone, demanding the world bend to her will. But in the quiet of my house, her voice didn't sound powerful. It sounded desperate, and that desperation was the first crack in her armor. At night, I walked the halls like a ghost, my bare feet cold against the wood floors. I stopped at the spare room. The one we'd painted yellow when she was a baby, the one that still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets I kept in the dresser. I stood in the doorway and let the memories wash over me, her small body curled up in the crib, her laughter like bells in the summer air. It was a room that had once been a promise, a place where she would always be safe, always loved. Now it was just another room in a house she wanted to tear apart. I closed the door gently, as if I could lock away the past and keep it safe from her grasping hands. I didn't tell anyone what she'd said to me. Not the neighbors who stopped by with worried glances, not the old friends who called to check in. I let them believe everything was fine, that I was just busy, just tired. I didn't want to share the ugliness of what she'd done. It felt like a bruise I needed to press myself, over and over, until the ache dulled into something manageable. In the quiet of those days, I learned to find strength in solitude. I learned that sometimes the only way to protect your heart is to close the door and let the world wonder. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of things I'd been too afraid to face, my own fears, my own failings. I thought about how I'd raised her to believe she could have anything she wanted if she just asked loudly enough. I thought about how many times I'd said yes when I should have said no, how I'd given in to her tantrums and her sweet manipulations because I couldn't bear to see her unhappy. In the silence of my house, I saw the truth of it all. I'd been complicit in her becoming this person. And that truth was a weight I had to carry alone. She tried to come back to the house once, standing on the porch in her designer coat, her hair pulled back in that severe bunch she always wore when she wanted to look older, more in control. I watched her through the crack in the curtains, saw her eyes dart from the door to the windows, her mouth set in a hard line. She knocked once, twice, then called out my name in a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone else. I didn't answer. I didn't even breathe. I let her knock and call and finally leave, her footsteps fading down the front walk like a memory I wasn't ready to let go of. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve that I wouldn't be moved by her performance, by her need to control what was never hers. I started to take long walks around the property at dawn, the cold air burning my lungs and making me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. The trees were just starting to bud, fragile green shoots pushing through the dirt like tiny rebellions. I let my fingers brush the bark of the old oak by the fence, felt the rough texture ground me in the present. This land was mine, these memories were mine, and no amount of pleading or threats could change that. In those early morning walks, I began to see the shape of my own freedom. An idea that had been buried under years of being needed, of being everything to someone who saw me as nothing. I started making lists in the quiet of the kitchen, scrawling them on scraps of paper. Things I needed to do to protect the house, things I needed to do to protect myself. I wrote down names, dates, small details that felt insignificant but weren't. I started to see the patterns, the ways she'd woven her life around mine like a parasite. And I realized that if she wanted to make me an orphan of my own memories, I would have to make her an orphan of her illusions. Not with anger or violence, but with a calm, unshakable refusal to be her stepping stone. Every night, I slept with the house key under my pillow, the cold metal pressing into my skin a reminder of what was at stake. She could take the townhouse, the job, all the things she thought made her who she was. But she couldn't take this. She couldn't take the quiet, the small, stubborn flame of my own worth. And as I lay in the dark, I let that thought fill me up until there was no room left for fear. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if she would find a way to force my hand, to make me sign away the last piece of myself. But I knew one thing with a clarity I'd never felt before. I was done being the woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. I was done being the mother who kept the peace at the cost of her own soul. I was ready to vanish into the quiet of my own making, to build walls not out of bricks and mortar, but out of the unshakable truth that I was enough, that I would not be moved. And in that quiet, I started to plan. The shift wasn't sudden. It came in small, careful steps, the way you teach yourself to walk again after you've forgotten what it feels like to stand. I stopped thinking of myself as her mother and started thinking of myself as the keeper of my own story. It was a slow kind of becoming, like watching the sun slip over the edge of the world 1 inch at a time. In the mornings, I brewed my coffee and sat at the kitchen table where she'd once sat, her demands still lingering in the air. But now, I didn't taste the bitterness of her words. I tasted something else, something like possibility. I started gathering little pieces of her life the way she tried to gather mine. Not out of spite, but because I needed to see her world for what it really was. I drove past her townhouse once, just to see it. The building was new, sterile, all glass and steel, but it looked cold to me, like a place built on borrowed time. I watched her walk out the door one afternoon, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp and clipped even though I couldn't hear the words. She didn't look like the daughter I remembered. She looked like a woman trying too hard to hold together a life that didn't fit her. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt a calm, steady kind of curiosity. Who was she when she thought no one was watching? I found small ways to learn more. I called the leasing office for her townhouse, pretending to be someone else, asking about maintenance records, about complaints. They didn't know me, didn't know the tremor in my voice was from something deeper than curiosity. I learned about the noise complaints, the unpaid fees she tried to bury under charm and empty promises. I wrote it all down in a small notebook I kept in the drawer by the stove, each detail a stitch in the tapestry I was slowly weaving. Not to punish her, no, that was never the point, but to see her life without the filters she'd always worn so carefully. At night, I lay in bed and let my thoughts spin out like thread. I thought about how she'd always been so good at convincing people she was exactly who they needed her to be. She'd done it to me, too, for years. The sweet smiles, the practiced tears, the way she'd wrap herself in my love like a shield. And I'd let her, because I wanted so badly to believe she was still the child I'd rocked to sleep. But in the quiet of those nights, I saw the truth for what it was. She'd been using my love as a ladder, climbing over me to reach something she thought would make her whole. But she was always missing the last rung, the one that comes from within, the one I couldn't give her. I started to imagine what it would feel like to be free of her expectations. To let her be an orphan not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I needed to stop letting her hurt me. I thought about the word she'd used, orphan, and how it had rolled so easily off her tongue, as if she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I realized then that she wasn't just threatening me. She was threatening herself, too. Because in trying to make me give up this house, she was giving up the only part of herself that had ever been real. She was burning her own history to the ground, and she didn't even see the smoke. I spent my days tending to small things, mending a loose board on the porch, weeding the garden until my hands were raw. There was something healing in the dirt, in the ache of my muscles. It reminded me that I was still here, still solid in a way she would never understand. The house creaked around me like an old friend, the wood and nails holding their secrets close. In those moments, I felt stronger than I'd ever felt before. I was no longer waiting for her to come home. I was building a home for myself, even if it was just in the quiet corners of my own mind. I started talking to people, too. Not about her, not about the fight she'd started, but about small things, recipes, the weather, the way the light hit the kitchen floor in the afternoons. I let them see the parts of me that had nothing to do with being a mother, nothing to do with being hers. And in those conversations, I started to feel the edges of who I'd been before she was born, before I'd given so much of myself away. I wasn't just her mother. I was a woman who loved to read poetry in the morning light, who found comfort in the scent of lavender and fresh bread. I was someone who could survive the breaking of a bond I'd thought was unbreakable. One afternoon, I drove out to the edge of town and sat by the river. The water moved slow and heavy, the kind of current that could carry anything away if you let it. I watched the way it bent around the rocks, the way it shimmered in the late-day sun. And I thought about how sometimes the only way to keep yourself from drowning is to let go of the weight that's pulling you under. That's what she'd become for me, a weight I couldn't carry anymore. So I decided to let go, not out of anger or revenge, but out of a quiet kind of mercy. For her, and for me. I went home that evening with a calm I hadn't felt in years. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place she'd tried to turn into a battleground, and I wrote down everything I'd learned. The debts, the lies, the way she tried to make me small so she could feel big. I didn't know yet what I would do with it all, but I knew that I was done pretending. I was done playing the role she'd cast me in. I was ready to become someone new, someone who could look at her and see not a daughter, but a stranger. And in that strange, quiet space, I felt something like hope. I didn't announce my return to her life. I didn't need to. My moves were quiet, deliberate, like the slow drip of water that eventually wears down even the hardest stone. I started with her job, that pristine world she thought was untouchable. I knew she kept her secrets tucked away in that office, the same way she'd always kept her ambitions, hidden under polite smiles and careful half-truths. So I went there, not with threats or loud accusations, but with the kind of calm certainty that made people listen. I found her boss one afternoon, a woman with kind eyes and a weary smile, the kind of person who had learned to see through the performance of people like my daughter. I asked for a moment of her time, and I told her what she needed to know. I didn't embellish or soften the truth. I just laid it out, like a surgeon cutting away dead flesh. The debts she'd hidden, the lies she'd told to keep the job she thought she deserved. I watched the flicker of recognition in that woman's eyes, the quiet way she folded her hands on the desk as if she'd already known, deep down, but had been too afraid to face it. She thanked me in that hushed voice people use when they're not sure if they're grateful or horrified. I didn't feel triumphant when I left. I felt, still, like I had finally stopped trying to hold up a world that wasn't mine to carry. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and let the engine idle, the hum of it beneath me grounding me in the present. I didn't think about the fallout, about what she would do when she found out. I just thought about how freeing it was to let the truth breathe. She had built her life on borrowed trust, and I was done being the one to patch the cracks. The townhouse was next. I remembered how she'd bragged about it. The view, the sleek kitchen, the way it made her feel important. But I also knew how fragile that world was, how close it was to slipping through her fingers. I called the landlord, a man who sounded tired even before he answered the phone. I told him about the late payments, the noise complaints she'd dismissed as nonsense. I didn't lie. I didn't need to. The truth was enough to pull the rug out from under her, to show him the cracks she'd tried so hard to paint over. He listened, silent but attentive, and when he hung up, I knew it was only a matter of time before the keys she thought were hers turned to dust in her hands. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about balance, about setting things right in a world she'd tried to twist to her will. I moved like a ghost, leaving no footprints behind me, no trace of anger or bitterness. I didn't need her to see me doing it. I didn't need her to know how much effort it took to pull the threads of her life apart. It was enough for me to know that I could, that I wasn't powerless, even if I'd spent years convincing myself otherwise. She started to feel the ground shift beneath her feet, though. I could hear it in her voice when she called me one night, her tone sharp and frantic. "I know what you're doing," she said, her words clipped and angry, but underneath it, there was something else, fear. I didn't deny it. I didn't try to soothe her. I let the silence fill the space between us, heavy and final. Because that was the truth she had never been able to accept. Sometimes the quiet says more than any words ever could. I spent those days watching her from a distance, not because I wanted to gloat, but because I needed to see the truth of who she really was. I saw the way she flinched when her landlord's name lit up her phone. I saw the tight lines around her mouth when her boss called her into the office, the way her hands shook when she thought no one was watching. She was unraveling, piece by piece, and I let her. Not because I didn't love her once, but because I had to love myself more now. I had to let her become the orphan she claimed she wanted to be, so I could finally be free. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and watched the sun dip behind the trees, the last light turning the house into something almost holy. I let the quiet settle around me, let it remind me of the woman I'd always been beneath the roles I'd played. There was a peace in that silence, a kind of gentle finality that told me I'd done enough, that I didn't need to keep proving my worth to someone who only saw me as a means to an end. I never shouted. I never raised my voice. That was the part that mattered most to me. I wanted her to know that my strength wasn't in my anger, but in my refusal to be moved by hers. The house stood solid around me. Every creak of the floorboards a testament to the years I'd spent building something real. She could call it wasted space if she wanted to. She could call me selfish, call me cruel. But I knew the truth. I knew that this house was more than just walls and wood. It was the last piece of myself I hadn't given away. I watched her world crack in the places she'd tried to hide, and I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I let her see the cost of what she'd done, not because I wanted her to suffer, but because I needed her to understand that love isn't a transaction. It's not something you can demand or take by force. It's something you earn, piece by piece, in the quiet spaces where the truth lives. And if she couldn't see that, then she was already an orphan in every way that mattered. In the end, I didn't feel victory. I felt something simpler, something softer. Relief. A quiet kind of relief that let me sleep through the night for the first time in years. The house was mine. The quiet was mine. And in that stillness, I found a kind of power I'd never known I was capable of. A power that didn't need to shout to be heard. She came back to the house one last time, her footsteps heavy on the front porch, as if she could still force her will through sheer force of presence. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, the sky a heavy bruise above us, and I could feel the weight of everything we'd left unsaid pressing in from all sides. I watched her from the window, the way she squared her shoulders, the way she held her chin high even though her eyes were already starting to crack around the edges. I didn't move to open the door. I let her stand there, her hand hovering over the knob as if she could feel the finality of this moment seeping through the wood. When I did open the door, I didn't say her name. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there, the threshold between us a line that neither of us could cross without losing something we could never get back. She looked at me, her lips parted like she wanted to spit out every bitter word she'd swallowed, but nothing came. For a moment, we just stood there, two women who used to be everything to each other, and now were nothing but silence and the ghost of what we'd been. "I know what you did," she said finally, her voice low and shaking. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair pulled back too tight, her eyes rimmed red. "You ruined everything. You had no right." I didn't answer at first. I let the words hang in the air between us, let them settle into the quiet the way dust settles onto old furniture. She wanted to fight, wanted me to rise up and meet her anger with my own. But I had no anger left for her. only a kind of weary resignation that felt like freedom in my bones. I had every right, I said softly, because you tried to take what wasn't yours to take. You tried to make me small enough to fit in your pocket. But I won't be small for you anymore. She flinched at that, her mouth twisting into something that was almost a smile but couldn't quite hold. You think this makes you better than me? You think tearing everything down makes you strong? I think, I said, my voice as calm as the sky before a storm, that I was tired of being the mother who gave everything and asked for nothing. I think I finally remembered that I have a right to my own peace, even if it means you have to learn what it's like to stand on your own. She stepped forward then, her hand tightening on the doorframe as if she could still force her way in. But I didn't move. I didn't step back or invite her to cross that line. I held her gaze and let her see that I was done being the woman who would do anything to keep her close. I was done being the mother who would sacrifice herself just to keep the peace. You don't get to do this, she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. You don't get to just walk away. But that was the thing she had never understood. I wasn't walking away. I was staying right here, in the house that was mine, in the quiet that was mine. I was letting her go because holding on was killing me a little more every day. I was choosing to be my own person, not hers. She looked at me then like she was seeing me for the first time, not the mother she could bend to her will, but the woman she couldn't reach anymore. And in that look, I saw the final thread snap. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just let her hand fall to her side and stepped back, her shoulders slumping under the weight of a truth she couldn't bear to face. You're really going to let me go, she said, and it wasn't a question. It was the quiet realization of someone who had finally run out of chances. I am, I said, and I meant it with every beat of my heart. Because you chose to be an orphan. I'm just giving you what you asked for. She didn't argue after that. She just turned and walked down the steps, her footsteps soft and uncertain on the gravel path. I watched her go, the way her figure blurred in the distance until she was just another shadow in the gathering storm. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt the slow, aching release of something I'd been holding on to for far too long. When the door closed behind her, I leaned my forehead against the wood and let out a breath that tasted like salt and old sorrow. I thought about all the nights I'd spent waiting for her to come home, all the times I'd bent myself in half to keep her from falling apart. I thought about the little girl she used to be, the one who used to slip her small hand into mine and trust that I would keep her safe. And I thought about how sometimes the only way to love someone is to let them go, even if it leaves you with nothing but the echo of what used to be. I walked through the house after she left, touching the door frames, the walls, the worn edges of the kitchen counter. I let the memories come and go like the tide, each one a gentle reminder that this was my home long before she tried to claim it. I wasn't losing anything. I was choosing myself. And in that choice, there was a kind of peace I'd never known before. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain battering the windows in a steady, cleansing rhythm. I stood at the window and watched the water wash away the dust and the dirt, watched it turn the world into something softer, something new. And in that moment, I realized that the house wasn't just mine because of a deed or a name on a piece of paper. It was mine because I had chosen to stand in the quiet, to hold my ground when she tried to tear it out from under me. I didn't know what would come next for her. I didn't know if she would find her way back to herself or keep running until there was nothing left but the memory of what she'd lost. But I knew what would come next for me. I would wake up tomorrow and make coffee in the kitchen she said was wasted on me. I would sit in the living room and watch the light move across the walls, and I would know that I had done the hardest thing a mother can do. I had let go, not out of anger, but out of love. And in that letting go, I finally found the quiet I'd been searching for all along. The morning after she left, the house felt different. Not emptier. No, it felt more like it had exhaled, like it was finally allowed to be what it had always been, mine. I moved slowly through each room, tracing my fingertips along the walls, feeling the worn edges of the banister and the smooth curves of the door handles. It was as if the house itself was sighing with relief, its quiet heartbeat steady and sure now that the threat of her presence was gone. I felt that same steadiness in my own chest, a calm so deep it didn't need to be spoken. It was enough just to breathe it in. I went into the spare room, the one we'd painted yellow when she was a baby, the one that had always been both promise and burden. For the first time in years, I let myself really look at it. The faded paint, the cracks in the ceiling, the dust that had settled in the corners like an old memory. I thought about how it used to be a nursery, then a playroom, then a place where dreams went to die. I stood there for a long time, letting the ghosts of what might have been swirl around me. And then, without warning, I found myself smiling. Because I realized that this room didn't have to hold her story anymore. It could hold mine. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I took out the old cardboard boxes from the attic, the ones filled with things I hadn't touched in years, letters, photos, pieces of the life I'd lived before she was born. I spread them out on the kitchen table, the same table where she'd once tried to make me surrender. I let myself remember. The woman I used to be, the one who laughed too loudly, who danced barefoot in the kitchen when no one was watching. The woman who had dreams that didn't include being someone's mother, who wanted things just for herself. She was still here, buried under years of sacrifice and compromise. And she was finally ready to come back. I spent days clearing out the clutter of the past, every box and broken trinket a quiet exorcism of the parts of myself I'd given up. It wasn't about erasing her, no, she would always be part of me, the echo of a love that had once been whole. But I needed to make room for the woman I was now, the woman who had learned to stand on her own even when the world tried to tell her she was nothing without someone to care for. It was slow work, but with every piece I let go of, I felt a little lighter, a little more like myself. And then, when the house was as empty as it would ever be of the weight of her expectations, I made the decision I'd been circling around since the moment she said she'd rather be an orphan. I didn't keep the house for myself. I found a family, a young couple with a baby on the way, the kind of people who still believe that a house could be a home. I watched them walk through the rooms, their hands brushing the walls with wonder, their eyes shining with the kind of hope I'd once had. I saw in them the chance for this house to be what it was always meant to be, a place of new beginnings, not old wounds. When I signed the final papers, I didn't feel loss. I felt something cleaner, something like release. The house wasn't my battleground anymore. It was my offering to the world, a testament to the strength it takes to let go of the things you've loved. My daughter saw me sign those papers. She was there, her eyes wide with a kind of stunned disbelief. For a moment, I thought she might say something, might reach for me with the same desperation she'd always held just beneath her skin. But she didn't. She just watched, silent and pale, and I knew she finally understood that I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for me. I walked her to the door one last time, our steps quiet on the old wood floor. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her I forgave her. I just looked at her and said, "This is the last thing I'm giving you. Not the house, my peace." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded once, like she finally understood that some things can't be undone, no matter how hard you try. And then she was gone, her footsteps fading into the quiet the same way they had that first night. In the end, I stayed long enough to watch the young family move in, to hear the baby's soft cries echo through the halls. I stood on the porch, the air warm against my skin, and I realized that I wasn't just letting go of the house. I was letting go of the version of myself that had been trapped here, waiting for something that was never going to come. I was letting go of the need to be someone's anchor when I'd been adrift in my own life for too long. I didn't take much with me when I left. A few small boxes, a battered copy of a poetry book I loved, and the key to a future I didn't have to define by anyone else's expectations. I didn't know exactly where I was going or what I would find when I got there. But for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty felt like possibility, not fear. As I walked away from the house, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I carried the lessons of those walls in my bones, the quiet strength of weathered wood, the way light finds its way through even the smallest crack. I carried the truth of what it means to choose yourself, even when it costs you everything you thought you couldn't live without. And I carried the calm certainty that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the door and walk away. If this story spoke to you, if you felt the quiet power of choosing yourself in the face of someone else's demands, then I hope you'll stick around. I share stories like this every day, stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Hit that subscribe button and join me. Let's keep telling the quiet stories that matter. See you soon in the next one.